Okay, this is going to be kind of a twofer presentation. So it's spring in most areas of the country, and this is a busy time for equestrians but mostly for trainers. This is a time I see a lot of people come out of hibernation, they come out of the woodwork. The days are longer, it's time to go. Or is it? There is often the question of how much time your horse may or may not have had over the winter. And based on that, how do we approach reconditioning them? And we're going to start out by getting into the weeds of that, give you some real clear guidelines. Then we're going to pivot to whether or not a horse needs kind of a brush up on their skill training in the spring. Like, do they forget things when they have time off? Is it worth sending them off to boarding school, for, so to speak? So joining me again is Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Let's make sure audio is still working.
Hi, Jack. I'm here.
Perfect. Okay, so we decided to call this presentation from furry to fit because most horses are fuzzballs right now and they're starting to shed out and maybe they've got a little extra layer on the middle. So let's talk about this. Let's go to the first slide, Lynn. Let's start by addressing at what point do horses begin to lose fitness? Yeah, perfect. So let's stay on this slide for a second. Horses do maintain fitness longer than people do, but it's not as simple as saying if they were really fit in October, November, and then they had a couple months off, that they're gonna like snap right back into fitness. That's pretty false. And we used to think that they came back into fitness quicker, and I have various reasons for why we used to think that, namely because the types of horses I think we were basing those assessments on were high responders to exercise, like thoroughbreds and Arabians. So they make quicker metabolic gains. So it sort of skews the data if you think of it from that sense. But a horse that is out of regular exercise, let's define this as 25 to 30 minutes of low aerobic stimulus. So not a full training by any means, but just groundwork, easy hacks, 25, 30 minutes. When that per day, when that figure declines below 3 days a week for a number of weeks, the horse starts to lose fitness, or as we say, they detrain. There's a detraining effect. So when you go through a period of bad weather and you have a number of these weeks stacked up and the horse is not routinely getting out and moving around continuously for 30 or more minutes at a low aerobic zone, they start to lose fitness. When you get all the way out to 12 weeks, the horse is considered completely detrained, even if they were really at the top of their game in the fall, maybe before winter set in. And maybe they're, like I said, a metabolically high adapting horse, one of these thoroughbred Arabian types. So just because a horse doesn't complain doesn't mean that I always like to make the car analogy that what's under the hood isn't faulty. So the things that change, that detrain, that lose conditioning, a lot of times are things we can't see. And that's why it's easy to discount them, particularly mitochondrial density and capillary density. So mitochondrials are the small organelles that fuel the cells. They create energy in the muscle cells. So these are necessary for good muscle function. Those decline during this period. And then also capillaries, the small blood vessels that deliver blood and oxygen, they lose density during this time. So the ability for muscles to function well is inarguably deficient in the spring after a period of downtime. Also, plasma volumes decline. And the reason that's important is shuttling the substrates throughout the body, clearing metabolic waste that is a result of exercise. So all these things we can't see. Aerobic enzymes decline, muscle enzymes decline, the hormones change a bit because they're not getting a regular exercise stimulus. that all changes, but we can't see it. So it's easy to convince ourselves otherwise. So if you get all the way out to 12 weeks, you're one of these people whose horse has had the entire winter off, you're looking at a 1-to-1 buildup to be very fair to the horse and take the most progressive and gentlest rebuild possible and minimize injury and strain. So for every week the horse was off, you're looking at 1 week of building back up. We do also know now that long-term vacillations in fitness are detrimental to long-term soundness. So there are places in this country, I get it, if you live in Alaska or northern Michigan, you just can't avoid it. Your horse may have the whole winter off, but we want to do our best to keep them moving at least minimally. Again, 25 minutes of a brisk walk can help mitigate some of these long-term swings in fitness. So that's kind of how and when horses lose fitness. So let's talk about how to rebuild it. We'll move on to the next slide. And obviously, I've made this really black and white for the purposes of simplicity, but maybe your horse is somewhere, in the middle here. Maybe they had all of December off, but you had a nice January thaw and you were able to get them out and exercise them a few times in the middle of January, but subsequently they've had some time off and it's been kind of intermittent. So they might be, somewhere on a spectrum between totally detrained and having a tiny bit of fitness. So this does become very horse specific, but the general guidelines are the first thing that you want to do is not try to like make up for lost time with too much ambition. The first thing that you want to do is increase the frequency with which the horse is receiving gentle movement. So it's important that this is in the low aerobic zone. These are not hot, sweaty sessions. They're not long sessions. All you're trying to do is increase the frequency that the horse is moving around, getting some gentle exercise. This can take the form of, 15 or 20-minute walk sessions or ground driving, ponying from another horse, maybe a couple times a day. The goal would be, going from only maybe having time to get your horse out on Saturdays to finding, even if it's just 20 minutes, being able to do that 3, 4, 5 times a week, increasing the frequency. That's the first knob that you turn. Only when you have a month or two of increasing the frequency under your belt do you then begin to increase the duration of the individual sessions. So then you would you wouldn't make all of your sessions 45 or more minutes. You would choose, if you're getting the horse out, maybe 5-ish days a week, you would choose 2 to 3 of those days and dial up the length, not the intensity, not the rigor, just the length. And that's where you start to recruit muscle enzymes and develop those positive hormonal changes from the result of frequent exercise stimulus. Golden rule to avoid injury is not to increase the duration by more than 10% every 2 weeks, because, horses can overreach, especially past a certain age. After the age of about 12, they start to be more susceptible to sports-related injuries, and have metabolic changes that predispose them to that. But that's probably another presentation. So first, you start with frequency. Then you take those sessions, those frequent sessions throughout the week, you increase the duration, but not the rigor of a few of them. And then lastly, you get to increasing the intensity. And that's where you really start to see and experience real fitness gains. So let's go to our other slide here. And again, these are general guidelines. The general rule is that when your daily sessions each week, you've turned that knob, you've turned that dial to increase by 10% the duration of your sessions every 2 weeks. When you've gotten up to 45 minutes of low aerobic, so just easy walk, trot, maybe a little canter. We'll cover that in a second. And you're doing that regularly, 3 to 4 days a week, and you have maintained that schedule for about 6 weeks, then you can add intensity. So what do I mean by intensity? This would be people who want to ask, well, when can I start doing collection with my horse? When can I start jumping my horse again? I'm assuming that these were activities you did previously. When can I do, start working hill repeats for my trail horse? When can I do gallop sets? The hard workouts. This is just also a shameless plug for my book, which you see there, which is filled with these harder efforts, harder workouts. But again, you want to lay the base, which is first it's frequency, then you increase duration, and only then do you get to the hard workouts. So it's a patient process, but it works. And the horse makes adaptations very, very well following this approach. You really minimize the risk. The other thing is, I keep talking about injury risk. You may have a very sturdy, durable horse, and you might be tempted to, cut some corners and hustle things along. And the horse may not get injured. You might have a super durable one. I think we all know a few of those, but they don't adapt and absorb the exercise stimulus if it doesn't come in the right way. And so maybe you can think back to being in high school and PE class and doing some super hard workouts that just left you really sore. Like maybe you had to go sprint around the soccer field a bunch of times and you ran your lungs out and you ended up just with thighs that hurt the next day, but you didn't end up more able as a rider or with better mechanics or with the ability to recover and resist fatigue, right? You basically just did a hard session. Your body didn't absorb it. It kind of just tolerated it and got sore and inflamed. That's what happens with horses that, if we try to shortcut this journey. So just keep that in mind. The body absorbs and adapts to exercise in the way that I just laid out. So this is how we approach spring training. And then we'll just move on here to a couple of the questions I get frequently. So, and if you have more, you can drop them in the comments below. Lynn and I do our best to get through them. But the ones I hear a lot are, what if my horse lives in pasture? I get this one a lot. Well, maybe the horse has been off for 3-4 months because it's very snowy and icy, but he lives in pasture. So do these rules apply to me? Certainly for general wellness, digestion, hoof growth, immunity, horses that are able to live out and move a little bit are better off, in my opinion. However, the fitness losses I talked about before, in terms of the mitochondrial density, the changes in capillary and therefore muscle function, plasma volumes, all of that, yeah, just good muscle function. All of that does slide off the table, unfortunately. Yes, I do think horses in the long run stay sounder and sturdier if they live in pasture, but most horses, especially if they've been forced out of work for the winter because of such bad weather, most of them are not out there romping around. I mean, I see these photos of people in the snowy Northeast. It's so snowy that the snow's up to their belly, and the horse, I mean, maybe they move 20, 50 meters, but that's really all they can move around. The snow is almost too deep. So they're not getting those 25, 30 minutes of continuous low cardio movement that are necessary for maintaining fitness. But yes, they are a bit better off. And we don't yet know. There needs to be more studies done on whether those horses would absorb the fitness training faster than their counterparts that don't have access to pasture. That's an unknown at this point. Okay, some people ask, when should I start cantering? A lot of people, if they ask their vet how to slowly build up the horse in the spring, we start with walking and then we gradually introduce some trotting. And then, down the road, we introduce some cantering. That is a very sensible timeline to follow. I will say, however, canter is such an individual thing, and keep that in mind. And that is worth thinking through, because your horse might not follow the guidelines that you've read in magazines or what I just talked through right there. Some horses are very efficient metabolically and just biomechanically at the canter. Their heart rate's quite low. They kind of float across the ground. Of course, we all know their counterparts, that the canter seems like a lumbering sort of hard effort, and there's a lot of heavy hitting the ground and huffing and puffing. And So my point is or they may not have a great canter. It might be really out of balance and high adrenaline, in which case, if you introduce it too early in the conditioning program, you likely send the horse into an anaerobic metabolic pathway, which we want to avoid in the early going because, as I mentioned, we want to stay in that low aerobic zone so that we're getting all of those systems on board with the muscle enzymes, good muscle activity before we add intensity. So we want to make sure we're not activating anaerobic metabolic pathways. So that said, it's very horse dependent. Your horse might be able to introduce a bit of cantering, in week 2 or 3 of your reconditioning journey. So bear that in mind. Moving down the list, I think I already kind of covered this, but a lot of people swing their leg back over the horse in the spring and they say, well, I'm riding for about an hour. Why is Jack so hyper cautious here, starting with the 25 minutes, 30 minutes? And I will say that just because horses are often are not complaining does not mean that the exercise duration that we're choosing for them is the most optimal. This is something I've had to really learn a lot of patience around because I am an overdoer myself. Again, the things that we can't see under the hood, so to speak, the changes in their physiology, that we can't discount that. And like we know those changes happen and that we can rebuild them if we take a really sensible approach. In fact, there are high intensity sports like polo ponies that do take a chunk of time off. And when they rebuild, they get back to a walking program. I've read polo conditioning uh, journals where they walk sometimes for a month. It depends how much time the horses had off, but and then you think to what they build up to eventually in the peak of their season where those horses are just super athletic, high intensity, right? So don't forget the losses in fitness that happen beneath the surface, so to speak. And then lastly, I'll just ask, what about senior horses? Is it the same timeline? I get to ask that question a lot. It is the same timeline. I will, two points I want to make. One, you want to do your darndest to not allow senior horses to have extended periods of time off. I get a little bit neurotic about it myself. I've got several seniors here at the barn, and yeah, I try to do my best not to let them have large periods of consecutive days off because of the rapid changes in muscle enzymes and muscle activities. It's um, it's kind of always a game of preventing those losses because it's very taxing on a senior horse to lose fitness and then build it back. By taxing, I mean activities that should be a very low, easy aerobic effort often become anaerobic and stressful on the system. So we want to do our best to avoid the fitness declines. I know that's challenging. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. Lastly, the rule of frequency really applies with senior horses. You might just prioritize that and do well by your senior horse. Senior horses don't necessarily, depends on your goals, but they don't necessarily ever need to introduce intensity, depending on the individual horse. But frequency, and this is echoed by sports vets, similar to humans. The more older horses stand around, the stiffer they get and the worse their movement patterns become. So the more frequently, it doesn't have to be long or complicated, but we can just get them out and play with them, move them, maintain range of motion. So really prioritize that. So those are the conditioning pieces I wanted to cover. And now we're going to pivot to like the skill training considerations we might want to think about. So I'll let you take it over, Lynn.
Okay. People sometimes mention that they need to send their horse to a trainer in the spring for a tune-up, as if horses might have forgotten some of their skills over the winter. But in fact, horses have very long memories. We don't have a lot of research on this because realistically, nobody trains a horse to do something and then says, okay, well, let's leave him for 10 or 20 years and see if he still remembers that. But realistically, in real world here, I asked a number of people that I know who have a lot of experience with horses, and the consensus is that Once horses have learned something and learned it properly, they do not forget ever. But that the emotional state that the horse was in when they learned something can be significant. So in my left-hand picture, I've got Brandy. She gets in a trailer about maybe once every 5 years, maybe once every 8 years. She doesn't forget how to get in a trailer, or she doesn't forget that that's what I need her to do when I ask her to do it. But she learned that in the context of my reassuring her over and over that she is safe with me and that I was not going to pressure her into doing something that she was too scared to do. On the right, that's Bronze sloshing happily into a creek. At the age of 4, he learned to cross that creek, which is a lot bigger than it looks like in the picture, and enjoyed it because I made a point of saying, "Yeah, let's go play in the water. Let's make this a fun thing." So 17 years later, that's when this picture was taken. 17 years later, we went back and he sloshed into the creek like, oh, goody, I can't wait to go crossing this creek again. So each memory of a skill includes the emotion that's associated with this skill. And that is where we do have some study. Oh, so this is something that we do have studies on, and that is that you can teach the same skill and the horse can respond to the skill, but it's not necessarily with the say in the same way, depending on how on what emotion was involved in the training. In this particular study, there were two groups of ponies who were taught to back up on a verbal cue. The one group received a reward when they backed up. The other group had a whip waved in front of their faces if they didn't back up, as I'm demonstrating with Brandy here. And the training sessions were very short. There were 3 minutes max, maximum of 5 sessions. And in that time, all of the ponies in both groups did learn to back up on the verbal command. But the group that were trained with rewards learned more quickly. And the cardiac monitors on them showed stress only on the ponies who learned to back up from having the whip waved in front of them. So what we have is the reward trained ponies learned faster with no stress. And then 5 months later, they did a retest showing that the ponies who were trained with reward had more interest in hanging out with people. They sought out people to hang out with them. And when they were retested for their ability to back up, they backed up more promptly. The ponies who experienced negative emotions based on their cardiac monitors, the ones who were trained with the whip, responded more slowly and they avoided people, not just their trainer, which was interesting, but other people too. So it shows that the emotional state during training can have an impact on the motivation and performance in the future. And that having a whip waved in front of their face, they weren't hit with it or threatened. It was just waved in front of them. So that's very mild. If we take what often does happen to a horse in certain types of training, then we can see there can be a really big difference in the emotional state of a horse who is feeling safe and confident and therefore ready to learn, and a horse who has reason to be anxious and whose focus is more naturally going to be on how do I escape, or at least how do I escape more unpleasantness here. Anxious horses then in general have slower responses, which may give people the impression that the horse needs a training tune-up. It may not be, it may simply be he's worried and so he's slower to respond. This is our Shiloh, whose original training was obviously pretty rough, and she's always been anxious. I've asked her to side pass here in this picture, and she has to think about it first. She has to think because she's not confident just automatically responding to something that she doesn't do all the time. So a horse who's anxious needs more patience and confidence. They don't necessarily need more skills training. And then we have some other common spring issues that aren't directly related to skills training either. We can have changes in saddle fit. Jack, you mentioned how much horses can get out of shape, and then their saddles can fit differently as a result of that, right?
Hmm.
So that's a consideration, so that a horse might appear to be misbehaving when in fact he's trying to say my saddle's just not comfortable at the moment. We also have around here, we get spring grass, and even horses who are not metabolically challenged often can get very zoomy on spring grass, like Shiloh's running and bucking and kicking here. And, usually you don't want to be on them when they're doing that. So some of them can get very, very rowdy on spring grass, and the solution to that often can be just 48 hours with a muzzle until the worst of the sugary grass is done. And then we have some people over the winter, they don't necessarily ask their horse to behave properly in their groundwork. They might let them get pushy in their space or pull on the lead line, not asking the horse to focus on them. And so that has not detrained the horse, but it does sort of give the impression of like, well, I don't really have to pay attention and tune in at the moment.
I think these are really important reminders, like the lifestyle factors that happen in the spring. Like it's simple, but it's easy to forget those too, that there are things changing in a horse's daily environment that contribute to, their state of being, how well they're being handled, that sort of thing.
Yes. And there's a lot of refreshers we can do that don't involve sending a horse to a trainer, such as the fitness exercise or the fitness program that you talked about, taking them hiking and exploring, doing horse agility. These are things that engage their focus at the same time as we're helping them get fit. And then we can review the skills that they need to stay tuned in and focused from the ground. And then that, of course, is going to translate to when you get on them. And of course, we always want to use extra caution if we're coming back into work with a horse who's going to be ridden by children or novices. Um, just in case the horse is going to be a little frizzy or has maybe developed a medical problem over the winter that you don't know about, the first person on them should certainly be a confident, competent rider. Anytime you're driving a horse, extra caution is in order. As my friend who trains driving horses likes to say, hitching a flight animal to a lethal weapon is fundamentally a really bad idea, and therefore we cannot be too careful. So lots of ground driving, getting ready, and all sort of that. It is definitely in order before driving. And then as you see Brandy zooming along here, you might look at a horse who's in that kind of mood and say, today's maybe not the day to be to get on my horse for the first time. And it's always prudent to uh, trust your intuition on these things. So I think putting together what you and I have both said, Jack, um, for many horses to go to a trainer in the spring, if the owner is going to invest the money for 30 days of training, from what you're saying, it sounds like physically that could be a downright disaster for a horse.
Yeah, I thought a lot about this because obviously for good stretch of my life here to date, I've been a trainer. So people do sometimes send me a horse for a quote unquote tune-up. And I love those projects because there are sometimes horses that, but to be fair, usually it is a case that the owner doesn't have the time to put in the consistency, which we touched on. That would be the frequency of sessions. And or they just like they're my endurance riders, they don't love getting in the arena, but they do see the value. So sometimes they'll send me their horse for a 30-day quote unquote tune-up to get, I was talking about muscle activation earlier, to just activate the patterns. It's not that a horse has forgotten because you've done a nice job illustrating, and that has certainly been my lifelong experience with horses, that they don't forget. Sometimes I'll ride a horse that like it hasn't done anything in like a decade. And you'll sit on it and be all out of shape and feeling a little bit rusty underneath you, but I can I can feel the training in that horse from way, way back. I know, oh, this horse had some training at some point. Like it knows to respond to leg cues and half hold. And, it's so cool. But because these are like wild animals, if we remember that. But so they don't forget that piece, but they do lose muscle activation. So do we. I mean, if you don't play racquetball in a number of years and you pick up the racket, you might not forget the rules of the game, but you're not going to be fluid and smooth, and you have to go through the motions, and what you're doing is waking up those patterns. And I was thinking about that a lot. Like that is the value of sending your horse to a trainer. If you're honest with yourself and say, you know what, I don't have the time, like my job doesn't allow it or whatever, understanding that what you're asking for is that consistent dosage of exercise stimulus to get the horse back into maybe burning off the spring zoomies as we covered here, as well as just reactivating the muscle patterns. What I don't love seeing, so this is my PSA, and you do see this a lot. I was guilty of it as a young trainer. A lot of times people send their horse for a tune-up, quote unquote, and what they really mean is they want to get the horse, round, or they want to get the horse, moving in a particular frame again, and they want the trainer to kind of get that done. And what happens is the horse ends up just being lunged in side reins for a long time, or other gadgets, draw reins, whatever, to get their head down and get them back looking good, quote unquote, in their movement. And until I learned just how negatively that impacts a horse's muscular skeletal system, that was part of what I did. So this is my empowerment to all you owners. Make sure that's not what you're signing up for. Be really clear and intentional about what is this tune up? What are we hoping to do here?
Yes, and I'll finish my part with my favorite way of tuning up in the spring is to get lessons for myself because, like you say, we get out of shape too, and we all know that our horses respond very much to how we ride them, and so often, in fact, I'd say practically 100% of the time, if my horse has had some issue, my instructor helps me adjust and help my horse, and then that takes care of the problem. The riding has such a powerful impact on the horse. So if I get lessons and my horse gets to stay home with me, I get to improve my riding, and then I get to help get him back into condition while I'm still learning more and getting myself back in shape.
Yeah, that's a great use of somebody's budget for the spring, or whenever your tune up, whenever that lands for you. Yeah. Wonderful. Was that our last slide, Lynn?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Well, I guess I'll just close by saying hopefully we've given you all a lot to think about in terms of approaching the physical and the training, the relationship, the emotional side of this phase with your horse. It's an exciting time. I love the beginning of full-on riding season. And remember, just because the horses aren't complaining or we're not listening close enough to notice if they are, it doesn't mean they're thriving. So have good timelines and think through some of this. As always, if you have questions, drop them in the comments below, and we'll catch you in our next webinar.